Tibetan Book of the Dead is not a book for the dead, as it is often misunderstood. It is a book for the living. What is the purpose of a book for the dead? It is said that when you are dead and you're transitioning through the intermediary state, which is called Bardo, a Christian equivalent of purgatory, a waiting place. Now, the understanding is Bardo Tadol is a section of spiritual teachings, part of a larger text that is specifically used in helping individuals navigate this unknown territory of life or death. It's the in-between space. But this is a total misunderstanding of what Bardo is. Misunderstanding stems from this desire to mystify something that is easy to understand just by knowing how to interpret. Padmasambhava was an Indian Buddhist monk. He traveled to Tibet and introduced Tantric Buddhism to Tibet. Tibetan Buddhism is a mixture of Buddha's teachings and Hindu mythology. That is why it is so confusing to understand. Tibetan Buddhism, unless you know how to interpret the scriptures, is completely mystifying. Not in a spiritual, mystical sense, but in a sense that it utterly confuses one. It is not a surprise that Tibetan Book of the Dead became one of the most popular Western texts. Even now, in Tibet, it is not regarded as that all-important spiritual text. But in the West, especially here in America, Tibetan Book of the Dead is extremely popular. In fact, it was one of those unimaginably popular books when it was released. But the entire interpretation is wrong. The author picked a few verses from the original Tibetan Book of the Dead and he gave his own commentary. And the commentary is totally devoid of the spiritual understanding of what life is, what death is, what is this transitionary period. Now, who is a teacher? When a teacher gives instructions, what is he intending for you? And how is he giving those instructions? Now, unless you are a part of a spiritual community or a tradition, from outside, these words will not make any sense. So, Tibetan Book of the Dead, as Americans know it, as the Western mind knows it, is a total misinterpretation of an enlightened master's words. There is great depth, there is great meaning in the text, but in the original text, we have to move away from the superficial interpretation and, quite frankly, a silly interpretation that these are incantations read loud after a person is dead to aid him in the transition. Now, this is how it would have most likely happened. A spiritual scripture that was preserved by students of Padmasambhava, because he's a master, he's guiding them on the path of enlightenment. Well, anything connected to Buddha, anything connected to Buddhism has to be about enlightenment. Buddha did not concern himself with unnecessary, complicated philosophies. If Buddha were to be alive, and if you were to tell this to him, these are the scriptures that we read to the dead, he would have probably said what Jesus said, leave the dead to the dead. You follow the living. I am the living. I have found a living truth. Why are you concerned about the dead? And why are you bothered about this transition? In fact, Buddha's understanding of life, even without him being here, if we just go back and refer to his interpretation of what the self is, what consciousness is, what awakening is, you can easily dismiss this whole idea of a separate individual soul stemming out of the body, detaching itself from the body at the moment of death and going in search of a new body. This is a complete imaginary landscape that we create for ourselves. How can you step out of your body when you're dead? Now, if you're stepping out, then you're not dead, you're still alive. And what is this stepping out? Why do you still have form? And how do you penetrate a body that is already there? Now, if you say you're going in search of a new body, is that body alive or dead before you penetrate it? If it is dead, then how can the living enter the dead? We have never seen that happen. We never see a dead body come back to life. If that was a common experience, then we could say that this is reincarnation, this is rebirth. But the dead are always dead, the living are always living. There is a clear separation between these two states. Buddha said, there is no self. There is no individual separate self. What you recognize as the self is consciousness itself, is aliveness itself, is isness itself. Something you cannot grasp with your senses, something you cannot talk about, something you cannot think about. Consciousness is the only thing for which you cannot create a story. What happens to your consciousness cannot be narrated as a story, because only form can have a story. Story is a limited interpretation of limited experiences of a limited phenomenon, which is the body. Something that is always there, has always been there, that will always be. How can you write a story about it? The story would be, it was there, it is there, and it will be there. End of the matter. That is what you are. At the center of your being, you have always been there. You are here now. You will always be. For that part of you, death is an idea. Even life is an idea. It's conceptual, it's theoretical. Experientially, the only thing you really know is your consciousness and a gentle murmuring in that consciousness which you observe and recognize as life. There is some movement, there is some shifting, changing, lights, shadows, pain, pleasure. a little bit of play. That's about it. You are the ocean, and there is the waving. How important is the waving for the ocean? How much of that waving process determines what the ocean's going to be and what the ocean's going to do? Now, when you're talking about rebirth, when you're talking about passing through an intermediary state, when you're talking about acquiring a new body, you're all talking about just one thing, the wave. You are not talking about the ocean. But the moment you die, you become a part of the ocean. You are not an individual wave anymore. Then, how do we understand this? So, is there no meaning whatsoever to this text? Or is there a way of interpreting it where we can clearly see that these are spiritual verses intended for the living who are always in an intermediary state? Bardo is not outside of life. Bardo is life. You are a bardo. What does the word bardo mean? It is two words, bar and do. Bar is movement. Bar is change. Do is island of stillness. Bardo is simply a way of describing the contradictory nature of aliveness, contradictory nature of being, which is both movement and stillness. Bardo is that state of your being. If you can be without thoughts, if you can cultivate a state of mind where you are not chasing after things, you're not moving between the past and the future, you slip into this state called Bardo. A state where you are a perfect island of stillness and at the same time completely flexible, completely wavy, with full ability to move around that island and watch it, enjoy it, experience it. You're not just a consciousness, you are also the watcher of that consciousness. It is also a part of consciousness, but how can stillness watch itself? How can an island know that it exists? Is there any meaning to the word island if there is no water surrounding it? It is the water, the moving water, the boundary of the water, the boundary of the island that defines what an island is. Bardo is simply a beautiful pictorial representation of that island of consciousness. In one word, you are capturing both. You are saying there is a firmness to your being, a part of you that does not lose itself in thoughts, a part of you that always knows what it is, a part of you that is the source of your wisdom, the source of your understanding of life, the source of your strength, the source of all the qualities you're searching for. And then surrounding that is your mind, is the moving part, is the changing part, to which belongs your mind, to which belongs your body, your thoughts, your actions, your desires. When you interpret Bardo from outside, you will see everything except for this island. Now, if you don't see this island, your interpretation is only about the moving, the changing. That is why Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about everything except for the most important thing, that island of consciousness and how to get to it. Because the island is not visible, the text is misinterpreted and misunderstood to be so mystical because you are unable to see what it's trying to point to. You make it even more mystical by saying it's meant only for the dead. It is true, even now in Tibet, this text is read aloud when a person is dying or is dead. Now, these teachings, when the master was alive, was given as a method. While you are fully alive, fully conscious, where death is interpreted as an eternal reality. It is not seen as a phenomenon that happens at the end of life. Death can happen any moment. People die all the time. If you have to prepare for death, then you have to prepare right here, right now. You have to look at death as something that can happen any moment. Now, if you interpret life as an experience that is seamlessly interconnected with death, you can die any moment, then how can Tibetan Book of the Dead be something that is useful when you're dying or after you die? In actuality, you are dying all the time. Every moment, a part of you is alive, a part of you is dying. And how can you be sure about when you're going to die? The moment you understand such a simple idea that the living can never know the dead, life cannot know death. Because it cannot know death, the only thing it can do is acknowledge the reality of it and prepare for it. Because at least the mind knows, the body knows that it is moving towards the edge of the waterfall. It can see the scenery, it can see the landscape, it can see the changes that are happening inside, outside, all around, and it can see that that occasion is coming.